Suffering in and of itself is poison.
And she died right there in my arms.
I'm just trying to have control over the things that I can't have control over.
No wonder we're struggling so much with mental and emotional well-being.
When reality isn't what I expect and what I hope, I grieve and I have loss.
And life just isn't fair. If you're thinking of ending it, don't. Hang on. Hold on. There's help. And this one's huge. I can't recommend this enough.
The very thing that's going to help cure that sadness is doing something.
Man, the probabilities of health and happiness and well-being and success are massive. Gentlemen, welcome to the Formidable Family Man podcast. I'm your host, Greg Denning, and my guest today is my big brother, Jeffery Denning. I'll let you introduce yourself, brother, all the stuff and things. I'll start with a story, though. This is one of my favorite stories. I tell people all the time that he and I can't even remember. I was either just about to get married or I might have been married already. And I think we were in Dallas, Texas, and you're like, hey, give me your knife. And I'm like, I don't have a knife. And you lost. You're like, dude, how do you not have a knife? Like, you're not even a man if you don't carry a knife. And we literally went and found a knife store in the mall, and you bought me my first knife. And I was like, yeah. It was so fun.
Good knife, too. I actually spent some money on you.
And sadly, I've been through many knives as I've traveled around the world and sometimes forgotten to check them. And they ended up in airport security. And I had a knife confiscated from me one time in Jerusalem because I didn't know you're not supposed to have a knife in Jerusalem.
Nope. It's illegal in Israel. Knives
very
are
illegal. And then the last time we had a funny incident is our whole family. So now all my kids carry knives. And we checked. So when you go into Arabic countries, they have security at the door of the airport. So you're checking, like you're going to check your luggage, right? So it's okay to have a knife in checked luggage. But if you're in certain countries, they check it at the door in your checked luggage. So we roll into Egypt. We had 17 knives. Our whole family's traveling, right? Dude, they lost it. They pulled us all over. It was this huge thing. And we're like, oh man, we're gonna miss our flights. And we had some big knives that I just like some custom made, gorgeous knives that I had bought in Turkey.
Cool.
And this police officer, he brought all his buddies in. They're all going off in Arabic, and we're like, oh man. So finally, he calls over this the main guy from the airline. He's like, can these guys fly on your airplane with all these knives? And the guy was like, yeah, of course. As long as they're checked, like, no problem. We're good. And so then they let us all go. And then it was a funny, crazy experience. We got home with all of our custom knives that we picked up around the world. Anyways, all right, brother, tell your story. Introduce yourself, what work you do and why you do it.
Well, first, edge weapons are so different than guns. You see some guns behind me, right? I teach firearms and tactics. That's my background for many, many years, running and gunning for almost 30 years, but 25 years before I retired from law enforcement. I still do some reserve stuff with law enforcement, so every once in a while I get to run some warrants, which is good. But it's Jeffery J. Denning. I started to distinguish that now because there's some other dude, spells the name same way, Jeffery Denning. He wrote a book about my childhood. That's not me, right? So he's written a couple books. I should probably read it to see what that's all about, see if he's cool. See if we're related. I don't even know. My first book, Warrior SOS, I interviewed a handful of guys and gal from different branches of service in the military about post-traumatic stress. The first guy to go public with his post-traumatic stress from Delta Force, the creme de la creme of special operations, did so in an interview with me. And three guys from the unit, were interviewed in my book, including Navy SEAL, including airmen, Army guys. Anyway, some pretty just good stories. After coming home from Iraq, for me, it was pretty cathartic to do those interviews. I have a couple master's degrees, one in military special operations, low intensity conflict with an emphasis in terrorism. And then I have a degree, clinical mental health counseling, which is what I'm doing. I have, again, background, everything from, SWAT team, a SWAT team leader and a negotiator. I've worked in dignitary protection. I got to be careful how I say some of it. And I've worked on with some other government agencies. I was an undercover federal air marshal. So, taking all of that, including a handful of buddies of mine who've died, who've been killed, who've been injured, who've been psychologically injured, who's taken their life by suicide, just dealing with traumatic and critical incidents for years on end. I've had a keen interest from the mental health side. It's like, how do we just get better? How do we do okay? Because as first responders, especially, you're seeing stuff that people shouldn't see. And it's abnormal,
And it's disturbing. There's something built into us, into our hard wiring. There's certain things when we see it disturbs us. Like it's just not supposed to be. It's not normal. It's not right, and it should disturb us. And so then I think one of the big questions is like, what do you do with that information? What do you do with that experience? Because it is supposed to disturb us, and I hope it does disturb people. And I hope that the people listening and they know, like, I hope they don't feel bad, like they're weak or broken or something. Like, there are things that are disturbing, and when that happens, it's what we do with it that's so important. I was hiking with my wife in Ecuador, and it was just this blissful, dreamy bucket list experience, and we were at 16,000 feet, and this couple fell off a cliff, and so we had already summited, and we were heading back down, and I ran back up to help. I told the story elsewhere, so I won't tell all the details, but I go back up to help, and she died right there in my arms. I was holding her, I was cradling her so she didn't fall off another cliff, and I'm holding her right there, and her face was 12 inches from my face. A young woman in her 20s, and she died right there in my arms. And then I had to help get all the rest of the people, the bystanders, off the mountain so there weren't more casualties. And then I ended up, going back up a ways and finding her boyfriend, who had also fallen, and he was all busted up. We had to package him up and get him off the mountain. And so, like, it was one of those things that it still gets to me. It's still so, like, it's just not something that you experience on a normal day, and another human being dying. Like, there's something to it, and so it's what we do with it that matters so much. Anyways, just a little interject in there. It's like this stuff matters,
right? No, yeah, that's pretty wild. I didn't know that. One of the things that happens is you got either one incident or multiple incidents. You have cumulative stress. We talk about post-traumatic stress. It's very normal to change our thinking about life, our worldviews change, our belief systems change, what we think about ourselves, others in the world changes, because here's what happens. So I look forward and I expect one thing to happen. And when reality isn't what I expect and what I hope, I grieve and I have loss, and I've watched plenty of people die and get killed. And shoot, I've negotiated with a guy who killed himself in front of me. So as a negotiator, I got to understand that that's still their choice, whatever happens. Accidents happen and people make mistakes. But if my hope is, for instance, that kids grow up and don't get hurt, injured, or killed, but reality isn't that, that's probably one of the most significant things that we can, as human beings, understand. Oh yeah, that's not supposed to be that way. So we apply these rules to ourselves and to others. We say, life is not supposed to happen.
Let me interject. Sorry to interject there, because this is so relevant. I want to just share this because, and I hope we continue your train of thought. This is real this week. We had just a beautiful, wonderful family. They have 5 little kids, and they're out traveling the world, kind of living their family dream. Both of them are veterans. Both of them served over in the Middle East in wartime. And they have this beautiful little family, and they came and they spent 2 months here with us. And we just became very close. It was beautiful. And then my daughter, they wanted to continue traveling around the world, and they wanted an au pair, a nanny. And so they hired my daughter to go travel with them. And so they went to Cyprus out in the Mediterranean. And this week they lost their baby. Their little 18-month-old just randomly started having seizures. And so they ran to the hospital in Cyprus, and they found that he had an irreparable heart defect. And it had been a miracle that he'd even lived that long. And he's gone. And so we all felt that this week profoundly. That sweet family and all his little siblings and mom and dad and my daughter being there and friends and extended family. So that's real. And the reason I share that is because, as you mentioned that, I'm like, that's real right now. And we've all just been wrestling with this idea of like, no, little kids should grow up and should live these great lives and become adults. And man, life just isn't fair. And it's just brutal sometimes. So I just mentioned that because what you just said is very real and palpable and relevant right now this week.
Yeah, that's hard. It's the sudden changes. Sometimes it's the sudden stuff that's really disturbing, but it's also even gradual changes. It's like we expect and we hoped that life wouldn't end up the way it is. So whether we get married and life isn't the way we thought it would in marriage, or whether we're getting a divorce and we think, oh, great, or whether we're in our career, whether we lose a job, whatever happens, whether we go on a call as a first responder, whether we see something when we're hiking, okay? All these things give us a psychological blindside. What it is I'm just grieving. I'm having loss. I'm frustrated at what I wanted isn't real. And so it's part of it is I'm just trying to have control over the things that I can't have control over. So when I grow up, I grew up in a way.
The discrepancy from like expectations and reality is what I hear you saying.
That's 100%. So I actually draw it when I teach this class. I draw it on the board. I expect this, but reality is over here. So the wider the gap, the more distress we have. And in some of that, we say, one, well, life's not fair. So this is something that I made up and I developed, and I'm teaching it. It just makes sense, right? And so we say, well, life is not fair. It's not supposed to be that way. We start having rules on ourselves and others, or we say, well, it shouldn't have happened, or I shouldn't act like this, or you shouldn't act like this, or it should be like this. Well, life is the way it is. You and I can't control anybody else.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Everybody has a choice. And so I can't change my spouse. I can't change my kids. I can't change the guys on the road. I can't change what anybody else says or does. I can't change whether somebody wants to attack me or my friends. Okay. Whether I'm in a war zone or just wherever traveling around the world, I cannot change anybody else. They have their choice. Some of the things that people do are horrific and horrible. I actually was helping out in a case not too long ago, whereas I have a psychiatric service and facility animal. I take her around when I do counseling and when I do debriefings, critical incidents.
She's amazing.
Oh, it is amazing. It's amazing to watch her work. The science of service animals is through the roof. So one of the things that I've seen after doing debriefings for many, many years after massive critical incidents, okay, basically it's when first responders goes, hey, this one's a little bit overwhelming. We probably should just chat about it. But I was helping.
And I can I interject there? Is that often what you're doing, brother? Is when a group of medical professionals or police or whatever or firefighters they go and an incident is pretty severe, then that's when you'll go kind of help them process and debrief. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, yeah. But here's the thing: we also, if we say critical incident stress management, CISM, sometimes people call it CISM, right? It has a handful of different components. The first component is pre-incident preparedness, and that includes education. If I can tell you, guess what? You're going to face difficult things in the future because you're a human being.
Yeah.
So hang on. How am I going to respond? How am I going to work through that? That includes understanding the physiological responses of sympathetic nervous system activation, what your body and what your mind's going to do, how you take snapshots of images, and you remember those forever because the brain does that. The first time I almost died, I can still remember what it looked like, right? It's very normal to have different snapshots, including memory gaps. And so when we talk about that, time distortion, audible exclusion, just different things that are like, wait a minute, this seems almost surreal.
Right.
And if we can have that
this week, even this week, you're saying it seems like it's in the movies. Like it doesn't feel real. I heard those a lot this week in what happened.
Well, and what happens if we can understand beforehand, this is what's going to happen. It doesn't make it easier, but it makes it better, because we would go, well, shoot, I'm going crazy if we didn't know about those things. And we're not going crazy. We're normal. So one of the other things that happens is I say, okay.
Sorry, brother. I want you to go back to your dog story. I totally interrupted that. So let's go back to her and what you were going to tell the story there, and then we'll come back to this framework.
Okay, cool. So I was helping with a little girl who was testifying against her uncle for assaulting her multiple times. Okay, just some evil stuff. You don't harm little children, and so sometimes we go, wait a minute. What is normal to me isn't normal to other people. And in order to get knocked out, so I actually came up with an acronym several years ago, TKO, which is technical knockout in boxing. If I transfer my moral codes onto somebody else, that's going to knock me out. If I have a knee-jerk reaction, and if I have ostrich syndrome, if I bury my head and think it's not happening, then that's going to knock me out. Go ahead.
This one gets me. I've been able to help a little bit in anti-human trafficking. Even going into foreign countries, gosh, I can feel the emotion coming up. And the stuff we saw and the stories I heard from these victims, and I hear you saying, it's like, we can't operate that they all have the same moral code, but at some point you're like, there has to be a common denominator. And I guess, I don't know, I think having the moral code is absolutely critical for every single one of us, and have a high moral code. And I think when others violate at least a common denominator moral code, for me, it awakens this warrior inside of me, and that I want to fight that evil.
Well, one of the things that happens is when you're expecting one thing and reality is different, you're grieving. And part of grieving can be anger.
Yep.
And part of survival is anger. And I think there's good anger, but I'll tell you, sometimes it can consume us.
Absolutely.
And so we need to check ourselves to say, okay, this is the way things are, and it's not going to do me any good if I'm just angry all the time, or if I can't have an outlet to say,
the outlet
well,
is
okay, now what? Here's what it is. It's a loss of control. So if I say I have an unwanted event or multiple unwanted events, because the term trauma is a little overused,
right,
then in that I have a feeling of no control over the outcome, because I expected one thing, reality's different. And sometimes I can feel helpless in those situations where, like, oh, if I could have only been there, if I could have only been there, if I could have helped out just a little bit more, if only.
Yeah.
Well, it shifts our worldview. And when it shifts our worldview, it interrupts our belief system. Now, what that has to do is it shifts our identity. It's a soul and identity wound.
Yep.
Because now I think differently about myself. I think differently about the world. And I think differently about other human beings. It affects me spiritually. Spiritually meaning my purpose, my life, what I thought, what I believed, what I hoped life was going to be about isn't. And so sometimes it can affect what I used to believe or what I thought I knew. And sometimes we say, okay, well, there must not, I can't tell you how many times I've been around individuals who say, well, if there was a God, why would he let bad things happen to kids? I don't know all the reason. I believe it's a perfect plan. And part of it is, like when I lived in Jerusalem and was anyway, there was giant millstones, right? Giant tire-sized rocks. I'm like, you know what? It was better that a millstone be hanged around that person's neck than they drown in the depths of the sea than to offend one of these, my little ones. That's what Jesus said. And you know what? Sometimes it's like, man, I wish I could tie that knot around his neck.
Yep.
But what I do is helping out in a legal capacity as much as possible to say, okay, how can we put these dudes behind bars? Now, not just guys, it's women too. They're pimping out their little 5-year-old girls.
Yeah,
so some other stuff that's all the stories and stuff, we don't need to go into details, but it starts to cloud the mind. It clouds my mind, okay? Now, sometimes is it
come
my
back to the dog.
behaviors?
Sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm not going to talk. Just finish the story with the dog.
So my dog sat with the little girl on the stand as she testified, and she knocked it out of the court. I mean, she knocked it out of the ballpark. It was the most incredible, eloquent, and precocious testimony I've ever heard, ever, especially from a 9-year-old. She did such an amazing job. But
this is
kind of cool to have my dog there.
A courtroom setting?
Yeah.
Really? And the dog went to her?
Yeah. In fact, when they first met, she was pretty stressed out, and my dog picked up on the clues and signs. And I, knowing my dog and working with her for a lot, and I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, my dog, she was stressed out, and my dog picked up on it and calmed her down pretty quickly. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
And she, because I know you told a story, I think on the last episode you and I did a while ago, but basically what she does, she'll go into a room and she just senses and feels the person who's kind of stressed, hurting, grieving, maybe the most, would you say? Like she picks up on, describe that for me.
So let's say, just thinking about a handful of different incidents in debriefings. Like one time when a bunch of cops got shot at and they couldn't return fire because they couldn't see. Pretty amped up, we're talking about it. Well, sometimes when you talk about it and revisit it, it brings up those same feelings. Physiologically, we start to change because of the sympathetic nervous system activation. And so that brings the emotion. Well, I remember my dog jumping on the lap of one guy, and then after somebody else was talking, he'd go over. My dog would go over and jump on somebody else's lap, or put her mouth on, or her chin on his knee. That's just one incident out of many, many. There was one where there was a handful.
Hold on, she's reading the room and moving around, and so you guys are sitting, and she'll just go over and climb up, and she's just trying to comfort.
Yeah. One time I was teaching a class, and I try not to bring stuff in that's going to create bad memories, but one guy goes, yeah, I had to kill a guy once. My dog was just laying there, and there were about almost 40 people in the room. She jumped up. Of course, she doesn't speak English, right? She understands sit and stay, but she jumps up and runs over and jumps on his lap, and it's called a lap, right? And everybody heard it, but she heard it too. She's like, oh, this guy's stressed out. She ran over there and jumped on his lap and tried to just calm him down. It's pretty amazing. This other time I was doing a debriefing, and there were a bunch of suicides within this organization, and people were pretty stressed out. So afterwards, a guy who used to be a canine handler for many, many years said, I don't think anybody recognized what your dog was doing, but I was a canine handler for like 15 years or something. He goes, your dog was working that room. I go, yeah, she was. It was pretty amazing. Dogs can, here's the thing about dogs. Dogs can sense seizures before they happen. They can be trained to do that. They can sense low blood sugar. They can sense some types of cancer. And they can sense stress. And it's pretty amazing, which is, again, I researched the science, and I'm like, okay, game on. This is what I'm going to do.
Amazing.
That's kind of what I am. I'm kind of nerdy when it comes to the wellness piece, the mind piece.
Jeff, I have a huge Cane Corso who's just an absolute beast. And so far, the only thing he senses is that he just wants to dominate. To eat anybody who is a threat at all, and anyone who gets in the way. I do not have the sensitive soul dog that you've got. That is awesome.
Well, it's kind of interesting talking about dogs. Dogs naturally would be hesitant to go into bad situations or be with people. They're a little bit hesitant at times. They're like, wait a minute, there's something not right.
Right.
But as human beings, we're not that good. It's like, you know what? I'm okay. I'm going to go over there. And then we get ourselves into trouble sometimes because we don't trust that gift of fear, as Gavin DeBecker called it, right, in one of his books. So I'm like, all right, now I can do that. But guess what? If I get burnt once or twice, now I might read the clues wrong or incorrectly. And then I'm going to have what's called an amygdala hijack, where I'll just tell you what that means. So the amygdala is the center part of our brain. It's in the limbic system with other, the hippocampus, the thalamus, the hippocampus. And everything starts to process through my amygdala if I've had a lot of bad things happen, right? If I've expected one thing and multiple times that thing has not happened. So the result for me is sometimes my amygdala activates quicker. Now, Japanese researchers years ago decided to make it so they, in mice, that the amygdala wouldn't work. And so when the cat came by, they didn't care. And so human beings, that's anxiety, or it's worry, it's fear. And it's also the amygdala is responsible for rage and violence, frankly, right? We got to have controlled violence. We have to have justifiable violence if we're even justified at all. But sometimes we start to misread clues. So, for instance, a little while after I came home from Iraq, and this is, of course, years of running and gunning, we had a pool at the time, and my kids, my wife was gone. My kids go, Daddy, can we please go outside? I'm like, no, we don't want the little one to get in the pool and drown. Please, Daddy, please. They shut the sliding glass door, and my eyes welled up with tears, and I'm thinking, oh, she's going to die. Because our minds sometimes go to a worst-case scenario. It's very apropos, I guess. It's very on the tip of the mind of those who've had negative experiences,
absolutely,
like first responders, on a constant and regular basis. The Stoics call it premeditatio malorium. It's, think about the worst case. Premeditatio, premeditate, malorium, evil. Think about evil. Well, I don't like thinking about evil. That's not going to be healthy for me psychologically. Now, as a SWAT team leader, I did. I'm like, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And then let's work backwards so we can mitigate
every contingency.
Bad things don't happen.
Right.
But sometimes I can have an amygdala hijack where I start having these emotions that I don't want to have. For instance, my kid was out driving and it's the bad weather, and I'm like, she's supposed to be home. I look on her location. I find she's stopped on the highway. As a retired first responder, I think, great, she's been in a car accident. But not just any old car accident. She's overturned and in a ditch. And sometimes those things that we visualize and sometimes those things that we experience can come back to haunt us. Now, here's what's really interesting. The hippocampus, part of the brain in the limbic and survival system, does stuff with comparison. So I said earlier, it's like, okay, a guy from Delta Force, writing in my book, and I'm interviewing him. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't have it as hard as you did. And he said, Jeff, don't say that because the things you experienced were difficult. I didn't believe it at the time, but here's something Viktor Frankl said in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Suffering is like the behavior of gas in a gas chamber. It will completely and evenly fill the chamber and the human spirit and soul, no matter the size of suffering. So suffering is relative. So suffering in and of itself, let me just finish this thought. I know you have some. Suffering in and of itself is poison. It doesn't matter if it's a little poisonous gas or a lot. You could have one critical incident or two, and you're still going to suffer, or you could have a dozen or hundreds. So I remember having this comparison. I come home from Iraq, and my wife is like, the dishwasher doesn't work, and the kids are bad. And I'm like, and? I had to suppress my emotions so I don't fall apart in the midst of chaos, or as a first responder. I can't fall apart on scene. I have to do triage. I have to do treatment. I have to act. I have to suppress my emotion initially, but I have to be logical. Okay, do this, 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 and this. But I've always said, you haven't been a first responder long enough to cry at work or on the way home. Okay. So what happens now is, and usually the tears come more than once if you're doing it for a while. So it's especially with kids. But what happens is I'm doing that comparison to my wife. I'm thinking, so nobody's dying. Nobody's limbs are getting broke off. So I now become less compassionate. And she goes, man, you jerk. And I'm like, what's wrong with her? Why is she freaking out over something little? It's because suffering is suffering. And the more compassionate I can be, even just a little bit, the better off it's going to be for everybody. It's going to be better for me. It's going to be better for other people, even if I think their suffering is less. One more story. So this lady, I remember this lady telling my neighbor, this is years ago, and I had just come back from Israel, and I was working as an air marshal. I was gone all the time. And this lady was crying and saying, my husband, after 24 years, has to leave and go to work, and he's going to be gone for a week. She was in tears. And my wife said, afterwards, she says, I was compassionate on her, but didn't she know who she was talking to? Like, as I add up the time away from work, from my kids, it's literally years out of our over 20 years of marriage, literally years of me being gone. In fact, my older kids say, well, Dad, you were never home. And it's right. I was working, I was gone, I was deployed, I was overseas, whatever, just because, I was the height of the global war against terrorism and all that jazz. So anyway, that's that.
Okay, there's a ton there. Couple things I want to touch on. We took our oldest daughter to get a brain scan at Dr. Daniel Amen, his clinics.
Yeah, I know him.
He's got some awesome stuff. And so she had a scan, and she was, and we learned about, all the science behind the brain, and she was born with, which I thought was fascinating, a super hyperactive, overactive basal ganglia. And so in a way, she was, in fight or flight mode all the time, constantly, 24/7. And she said it was inherited that one of her birth parents, because our oldest is adopted, one of her birth parents had gone through so much of these unwanted experiences, and the traumas, we're using the word, that it had been passed on to her. And it's fascinating. So it does. I guess I just want to share that because it massively affects the brain and the psyche, even so much that it can be passed on. And that was just one thought I wanted to share.
Go ahead. There is a lot of science there. There's neuropsychoimmunology. Okay, it's a relatively new field of study. It just says, hey, the body is keeping stress on the cellular level and it's changing you physiologically.
Yes.
And some of that is inherited. Some of that is just because of stress, especially from age 0 to 18 years old. The ACEs score, adverse childhood experiences. Okay. We know that people who have adverse childhood experiences, and it includes everything from where your parents are divorced, where your parents are not, where there's substance abuse in the home, where there's somebody in jail in the home, where was there abuse? Did you witness it? Were you abused? Physically or sexually, did you have enough clothes? There's just 10 questions, right? And so, did you have enough to eat? Was there mental disturbance in the house, somebody in your family? If you add those up, the people who have higher levels of ACEs scores, there's more complications in the future. Now, it's still our choice. We can have high ACEs scores, but it's still our choice. I can still control what I wish that I would have controlled. So in other words, if my expectancy on one level is something and reality is different, I need to understand one, I have control of nothing. I don't. I have control of myself, my attitude, and I have to act like the serenity prayer, right? I have to accept the things I cannot change. I have to give it up. Why AA works so well is like I have to recognize that I have no control over anything and God has the ultimate control and I need to rely on a higher power. So I can just say, okay, I accept the people or the situations that I cannot change. Because what happens is whether it's betrayal trauma or whether it's employer trauma or whether it's just difficulty of not wanting and not getting your way, I just need to accept the fact that I can't control anything. Whether I'm doing compressions and CPR and it's not my fault, I can control how many compressions I do and what the speed is. But the outcome is different. In fact, when I teach, EMS and fire and honestly law enforcement, I've done CPR too. Okay, so it's like I can control the speed that I do with the compressions, but it doesn't mean somebody's going to come back to life. What meaning am I giving to that thing? And is that controlling me? It's just because I want the outcome to be different. Well, maybe God wants something different. And I will tell you, having talked with multiple first responders and having experienced myself, I've seen miracles. And I've talked to other people who are like, you know what? One flight medic was telling me the other day, he told me a couple of situations. He goes, Jeff, there is no way on earth these people should have not been hurt or just be released the next day. They should have died. And he told me in detail some of these experiences. I can remember doing a debriefing after a vehicle rolled on a highway 10 times. The dad was drunk and high. His girlfriend, he was married, was drunk and high. The 2-year-old in the back seat eventually ejected. No broken bones, no lacerations, no internal damage, a couple of abrasions. You can't tell me that it's a miracle.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think heaven intervenes, and
That's where,
you just can't explain it.
right. And that's where it can also be so difficult because people start asking, well, why didn't heaven intervene in
Yes.
other situations? And
Yes.
it can be so difficult. As you were talking about chest compressions, I remember the first time I did it, this 19-year-old kid from a good family overdosed on drugs, and I did chest compressions in the back of the ambulance all the way to the hospital, and then he ended up dying. And that one rocked me. It really, really rocked me because I wanted to save this kid, and then he didn't make it in spite of all of our efforts. I don't know, and the wasted opportunity of a 19-year-old throwing away his life. Anyways, there's so much there and so many hard questions. And suffering is life. Life just has suffering. It just does. And it's going to be there. I guess I wanted to, that's a good lead in. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about increasing our capacity to suffer. Because you did say that everyone's going to suffer, and we all suffer at different levels, and each person is, what's happening to them maybe is significant to them. But at least I think there's a place where we talk about increasing our capacity, that we can handle more and cope with more, because I don't think any of us wants to be just totally wiped out over small amount of suffering. Like things didn't work out so well, and somebody left a mean comment on my social media, and I spend the next 3 days in bed. Right.
So one of the things that I think is more important is to talk about escape and avoidance, because I think it has more just I guess. Let me say this. So we expect to be happy all the time. And so if kids grow up and they're like, well, I'm just supposed to be happy, or we have a bad day and we're like, I'm not supposed to feel this way, we put rules on ourselves. So I can remember this guy, a coworker of mine, his wife got cancer. She was young. She died. I remember working with him through this situation. He came back to work and I go, how you doing? And he goes, man, I'm not doing great, because when I smile, and this is a while after she passed and he's back at work, but when I smile and when I'm happy or when I laugh, I feel guilty. I shouldn't be feeling that way. So he's imposing rules on himself.
Right.
But here's what happens. If I start feeling blah, if I start feeling negative, then it's easy to say, I want to escape and avoid. Escape and avoid is like, if I drink alcohol, it'll make me feel good for a while. Or what if I go spend more money? That'll make me feel good for a while. I start getting sad and depressed.
Some other words for this are like buffering, numbing. That's what you're talking about. So escape and avoid. It's like I'm turning to pornography or alcohol or drugs or the TV. I'm just binging on TV or social media or whatever. I'm trying to avoid and escape. I'm trying to buffer. I'm trying to numb. I'm trying to stay away from the discomfort.
Right. And so there's numerous studies. In fact, one of the last studies that I read about pornography said that they assessed a bunch of men and they said if there was a negative feeling, they were immediately going to porn because they wanted to feel joy and pleasure again.
Yep.
And so if we start to feel bad, it's like having a giant magnifying glass above my head, magnifying all the negative emotions. I don't want to feel bad, so let me go escape. Let me get into porn. It's easy because everybody can see it, but there's over 70 peer-reviewed articles that say that porn's unhealthy for a marriage. So wait a minute, if I'm not feeling good and things aren't really good in my marriage, maybe I'll have an emotional affair. Maybe I'll have a sexual affair. Maybe I'll invite somebody else into my marriage, or maybe I'll start swinging or kink or get a massage with a sexual ending, or maybe I'll get prostitution, or maybe I'll engage in those behaviors that it makes me feel good temporarily. Those do not make you feel good long-term. In fact, they lead to massive problems, whether it's checking out by gaming, gambling, spending money and going into debt, even working. Working is good. We need to work, but sometimes excessive working, is it just because you're checking out? Things are falling apart in other areas. And so I can become an alcoholic. I can become a shopaholic. I can become a workaholic. Yeah. I can also become an addict, a sex addict. Sometimes those behaviors also lead to the ultimate escape and avoid, which is suicide. Go, you know what? You're in trouble at work. You're in trouble at home. Things aren't going right. And you start talking to yourself saying, man, things aren't good. I'm just going to kill it. I'm going to kill myself because it's not even worth it anymore.
Right. Or can't
And
say
that people who take their life by suicide don't want to die necessarily. They just want the pain to go away. If the pain were away, they'd feel fine. The thing is, we need to experience pain. In fact, I was on a call the other day. I was teaching some at a fire department, and it was a smaller fire department, and they got a call, so I just rode along. You know, this lady hurt herself pretty badly, and she was just screaming. And I'm like, you know what? It is good that we feel pain, and let's just know we're alive. If we totally numb out 100% all the time, then we're checked out. So there needs to be that window of, it's okay to feel gloomy sometimes. It's okay. I'm going to have a bad day, but I don't want to stay in that. Now, the science is, how do I get back so I can feel better?
Right. Exactly.
I'm going to increase in sadness and depression and worry and anxiety and fear and suicidality if I don't get enough sleep. I need to have the discipline to go to sleep. And in fact, I need to wake up the same time every day, no matter what time I go to bed. That's going to, depression and anxiety, which are exacerbated in our society, right? It increases when we don't get enough sleep, but it's properly tied. Our mental and emotional wellness is properly tied with circadian rhythms. Now, one psychologist at Harvard said, look, if I can tell my clients that wake up at the same time every day, no matter what, okay, that's going to help psychologically, and get enough sleep. But even if I go to sleep late, waking up at the same time every day, and then eat a high-fat, high-protein breakfast.
Hold on. So prioritize, and I heard this before, and I've been thinking through it. So your suggestion, even prioritizing getting up at the same time over getting more sleep.
I am
as a whole.
But we need adults need 7 to 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep a night. Is it happening? No. So we need to do those things. And drinking before we go to bed just keeps you in your limbic system. You're not doing healing, and it's not well, especially after critical incidents. It's not good.
Well, and all the blue light stuff is looking at screens. Our bodies are just not handling that well, and we need to be off screens before bed, hours before bed.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to this
diet.
psychologist.
Go back to fat and proteins.
Yeah, eat high fat, high protein first thing in the morning, no carbs, no sugar, because if you're stressed or doing something stressful, you become hypoglycemic and psychophysiologically unstable the whole day, and it won't reset until you fast through the night. So he said, usually that'll put people back to the baseline. Just those two things.
Yeah, I love this stuff. 2 things right there. Just get some good sleep and eat fats and proteins. That right there can help reset our brains and our physiology, and we're resetting our biochemistry. That is so critical.
So there's a couple other things that I usually emphasize, and one is I need to move. I need to get exercise, because there's been studies, there's lots of studies, but there was one landmark study that said that it's exercising 30 minutes a day is as good or better than selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, pills for wellness. And you get a multi-billion-dollar industry in the pharmaceutical industry that's just pushing pills. In fact, there's another study that I read not too long ago that said, look, running twice a week is way better for you, but people don't want to do it. Right. It's way better for you than taking pills, but it's easy to take a pill. We need to change our habits. It's the habits that needs to change. So just like Socrates took Plato and held him underneath the water and then brought him up, said, look, as soon as you want to learn as badly as you wanted the air to breathe, then I'll teach you. So this, one of the versions of that story goes. It's like, are we wanting to really feel better? There's 2 things right there. The other thing is nutrition. 90% of our serotonin is created in our gut. That's the neurotransmitter that makes us feel pleasure. So here's what happens. I have sadness and depression, okay? And that's from too much of my body alarm activation going off. Too much sympathetic nervous system activation. Sometimes we're not even good at noticing or recognizing that connection between our brain and our body, that somatic connection, that polyvagal nerve that's changing our chemistry and physiologically, is changing us physiologically in our bodies. And so when I get sadness and depression, isolation and withdrawal, even if I'm with people, I'm pushing away, and it's easier to do because of the stinking phones, or internet and everything else. So I'm isolating from others. And oh, by the way, people will make you feel better physically. Studies have been shown that if I feel better physically, emotionally, and mentally if I'm engaged with human connection.
Absolutely.
I need human connection. So then I have
so many
physiological and emotional exhaustion.
Are just the relationships are struggling. And so we're adding this all up. We're just putting these pieces together. We're not sleeping well. We're not eating well. We're eating lots of carbohydrates, lots of highly processed foods, lots of chemicals, lots of sugars. And then our relationships aren't great. They're not profound. We're not having real meaningful conversations and deep connection. Just putting these pieces together, like we're setting up this recipe for the exact opposite outcome. And no wonder we're struggling so much with mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah. So, if I have sadness and depression, isolation and withdrawal, and I'm like, well, even at home, like, well, she didn't understand me, so I'm just going to push away. I'm like, well, maybe somebody else will understand me. That's not healthy. Okay. Or I just get in my own head thinking I must be going crazy because I don't feel good. If my dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin levels, all the neurotransmitters make me feel pleasure, are depleted, that's because that's a normal thing. In fact, I remember after coming home from Iraq, I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to go get certified as a skydiver. And I've gone a handful of times before I went and after I've jumped a handful of times. But I'm like, I just wanted something to make me feel alive again because I kind of feel numb.
Yeah.
And it's because if you're in sympathetic nervous system activation for too long, it starts to change us chemically. And so if what used to bring me pleasure isn't, hey, I used to like to do this, I used to like to do that, I just feel like, I'm just always blah. Well, go work out. Go be with human being. Yeah. The very thing that's going to help cure that sadness is doing something. And that's a hard hurdle. Yeah. That's a really hard hurdle when you're just, well, I don't want to do anything. Go work out. I'm telling you, it helps.
What I've found, and I'm sure you've experienced and for yourself and work, is the hardest part is just starting. And then once you get, it's that first step that's tough to get the workout in or to go talk to somebody. It's that first part. And then once you get going, it's a lot easier. Even on the mornings where I don't feel like working out, it's a little bit of discipline there. It's not like I have to exercise this monumental amount of self-discipline to do my workout. It's like, I just got to start. And then a few minutes into my workout, I feel fantastic. I'm like, yeah, let's go. I'm so glad I'm here. And I get a great workout in. It's just that first piece where your mind doesn't want to, your body doesn't want to. You think, I'd just rather not. And it's just that first step. I love, talking about this and sharing it with the clients I get to work with. It's like, just exercise discipline for that first step. And once you get going, moving your body, going in the right direction, it gets easier and easier to do it.
Totally. There's one other thing that I think is really one of the top things that I say people need to do, and that's gratitude. The science is through the roof. Robert Emmons and McCullough, researchers, University of California, Davis, he's done multiple research saying if I write down 3 things a day that I'm grateful for, that's one option, right? There's different ways to be grateful. We could write a gratitude letter. We can keep a gratitude journal. We can write down, well, I'm glad I'm not, and fill in the blank. So we can even do that reverse. But if I write down 3 things a day I'm grateful for, it will help me mentally and emotionally and physically. Why physically? Because because the body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk says.
Exactly.
Because I'm taking stress on the cellular level. I have to care for my body. I'm caring for my mind. The best way to care for my mind is look at things in a different light. Be grateful. So guess what? Kids don't live. Bad things happen. Accidents happen. People die. People get hurt. It's hard. You have to have you grieve, yes. But looking at it in a different light can really help us. Maybe appreciating those times after that grieving process. Grieving is hard. But sometimes even if relationships are injured, I could say, just like the Stanford Forgiveness Project, I need to forgive. I need to not take things personal. I need to impersonalize things. I need to accept the things I can't change. I need to not put rules on myself or others. I just need to look at life in a little bit different of light. Yes. Now, as I'm trying to have that attitude of looking forward, or looking not to be Pollyanna-ish, but to just say, you know what, there's good things happening in life. And if there's good things happening in life, there's always going to be opposition in your mind. And what happens is, like one neuroscientist said, the negative sticks to us like Velcro and the positive like Teflon. We need to try to emphasize and accentuate the things that are going well. And by writing those down, it's going to help us.
Yeah. So it's kind of a practice that goes along with gratitude, but it's just having something to be excited about, something to just see it with this positive, noticing anything from kittens and puppies to flowers to sunrises and sunsets and beautiful, simple things that we can appreciate, that are good, that are beautiful, that are wonderful, and that we can get excited about. And I always like to tell people, like, make sure there's something in your day and something in your week, something in your month, something in your year that you're excited about, that you're looking forward to. So I break it down into micro and macro. So at a micro level, I'm excited every morning to sit down with my family and have breakfast, and we do our like family devotional together. I get excited for that every morning. And so I wake up looking forward to my morning routine. But then, our evenings together as a family and training my dogs, I look forward to that. So I have all these micro things on a daily. On an annual basis, and this one's huge. I can't recommend this enough. If there's one thing I could just shake people into doing, like, take your calendar for this whole year and make sure you have awesome, meaningful things scheduled in that calendar, right? So every year I take my wife on a honeymoon. In 2 weeks, we're going out to this epic, that we're going out to the Azores Islands. It was basically like the Hawaii of the Atlantic Ocean, out in the middle of nowhere. But every week we take a week to 14 days, just the two of us. We're doing it twice this year, right? So I know my mind is always like looking for those cool things. I'm going to go back to the base camp of Mount Everest. I'm leading a group there in September. I just signed up again to lead a group back up to Kilimanjaro. So I've got these things spread out, and my mind knows they're there and they're happening, and I'm looking forward to things that excite me and challenge me. And so it's just really emphasizing what you were saying. It's like, keep the mind looking in a positive direction, grateful and excited, and emphasizing the good.
Yeah. No, you're right. And there's a lot of science behind that, actually.
Right. Tons.
Behind the vacations, because then we get little hits of feel good while we're planning it. But I like how you broke it up with the macro and the micro, because we have to do positive daily habits. Like, there has to be something every day that we're doing that's going to help us. Meditation and prayer, writing, reading, learning, gratitude visits, or just associating or grabbing somebody and telling them thanks, sending a note. I'll tell you, there's so many things that can bring us joy, and it's looking for those good things and doing and engaging in those things that are good, and not those things that go against our own moral values. But also, there are some moral absolutes. Like, if I'm going to break into somebody's house and rob them at a gunpoint, well, it's a moral absolute saying, I cannot find peace of conscience if I'm doing something that's just completely wrong. I can't, and I need to take responsibility. And if I'm messing up, then I need to take responsibility for it.
So let's bring that back, because this one's huge, brother. And let's bring it back from an extreme, because our listeners aren't sitting here thinking, how can I rob my neighbors at gunpoint? You bring it back to something that they're more likely to do. And the way I like to phrase this principle or practice is, it's really hard to like yourself when you're doing unlikable things. And it's really hard to respect yourself when you're doing things that aren't respectable. It's such a simple framework. And it can be something as small as just being rude to my wife or children, being snappy, taking out my stress or my frustration on them, just from the law of proximity. I'm upset about something over here that happened, and I bark at the kids, or I'm not listening to my wife, or I'm spending time and money. I'm being dishonest with myself or with others. It's the little things. I keep telling them I'm going to do something, I don't do it. Right? I'm breaking commitments I make, so I can't trust myself, and they know they can't trust me either. So it's even in the small things, it starts to tear us up inside. And every one of us, I think it's true for all humans, but especially for men. When we know we're capable of more, but we're living below that, it just tears us up. It just really tears us up inside. And it's part of the moral code. It's part of this inner self that just knows that there's a version of a best self. And we can be striving to do that instead of just throwing in the towel and playing small.
There's doing something new is always hard. But it's creating new neural pathways. Habit's easy. Now, if the habit is I'm angry and I'm angry at the people, and I'm a boss at work and I'm angry at these people, and I'm angry at my wife, or I'm angry at my kids, maybe they're fearful of me because my anger is getting me somewhere. That's not right, but there's always a reward. Maybe I'm dishonest a little bit because it's getting me a reward, but I cannot go out of my value system. I can't deviate that and feel pleasure. I can't deviate it and feel whole. Yes. Let me tell you, one of the things I value is kindness. So I came home from Iraq and I recognized I need some help. Okay, it was a while. I'm telling my little girls, they're all in a room and they were loud. I was tired. Their room was a mess, and they were tiny girls. And I'm like, hurry up, get in bed. And I'm yelling at them like this. And I went outside their room and my eyes welled up with tears. I recognized that I'm like, something's not right. I need to get some help. That was the impetus for me for change, because I went against what I value most. One of the things that I value most, which is kindness. And then I finally said, okay, yeah, I'm going to go get help. I will tell you, it was hard. It's hard because you feel embarrassed or weak, or you think, gosh, I'm not like other people. I'm different. And that's not the truth. We are all similar. And it doesn't matter if it's a little bit of suffering or a lot of suffering. We've inhaled some poisonous gas. So what are we doing about it? Well, if we're isolating and withdrawing from everybody else and saying, I'm different than everybody else, or I must be going crazy, that's not the case. We're human and we're having a human experience. What I need instead of isolation is connection. I need to normalize the fact what I'm feeling. I need to connect, and then I get to have those resources. What are those resources? I can mobilize my own resources. I just gave you 5 things to do: sleep, food, exercise, gratitude, people. I need to just mobilize some resources. And maybe it's talking to a coach. Maybe it's talking to you. Maybe it's talking to a therapist. Maybe it's talking to my brother. It's just talking to somebody who gets it. It's talking out loud. I will tell you, there's some things that bothered me, even on the classified side, that's stuff that had bothered me. And if you don't deal with stuff, it comes up. And I'm like, I'm not going to talk about it. And that's been years ago. I'm like, why am I not going to talk about it? Because it's classified. Why else am I not going to talk about it? Because it hurts. It's hard to talk out loud.
Yes.
But talking out loud can actually help it. It doesn't give if I'm talking to somebody I trust and they're confidential about it, then they can hear it and they can take some of the burden.
Exactly. It's huge. And talking to somebody who can help you. This isn't like you don't talk to your neighbor you're dumping all your stuff on someone who can't help you. But you're right. Talking to someone you can trust, talking to someone who can help you, man, it's a massive help. One thing I like to tell people is take it out on paper, not on people. If you can just dump it all and then just take that thing and tear it up and throw it away or burn it or whatever, but really just start processing and getting that up and out so it doesn't stay inside of us and is toxic.
I'm glad you said journaling. That's one of the other things I do talk about often. It's like the science of journaling is through the roof. In fact, when I was in high school, a good buddy of mine killed himself, and he asked me to go golfing a couple of days before he did. And I said no, because I didn't want to go. And then he killed himself. It's like, okay, I grabbed that journal and I've been writing ever since. Writing is so beneficial and cathartic to us.
And it's powerful.
Just write about goals, triumphs, hopes, dreams, frustrations, whatever. Just process, because we all talk to ourselves. Sometimes getting it on paper, like you said, is going to help.
Love it. Hey, I want to kind of shift gears and ask. I don't know if you have any experience with this yet. There's a lot of talk about and use of, I want to say, hallucinogens. I don't know if that's the right word. They're using was it psilocybin and LSD and others for PTSD and similar things. Have you Have you come across that? Are you, people, I have some, I know some people who are using it and have had some good experiences. I don't know if you've read any of the research or have talked to anybody about it.
Yeah.
Right where you are, where you're working, there's a lot of people using it.
Yeah. Ketamine clinics or even MDMA and different stuff. I just remember as a cop many years ago, they were stealing ketamine from veterinarian clinics and using it. And now they're putting it on a drip and saying, okay, let's see what happens. One of the things that, I've talked to or counseled with some first responders and some others who've used it. Some said some said it didn't work at all for them. Some said it was a horrible, terrible trip and they'll never do it again. Some said it was a horrible, terrible trip, but it worked. I have not delved into the science of it. I haven't.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And
That's something I think
people ask me, and I'm like, well, I don't know. There's a handful of different things you can do for wellness.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we got to keep an eye on it because it's happening, and they're doing a lot of research on it, and it's something that interests me. So I wonder if you've seen it. And I know where you're working, like I said, there are people using it, and you and I both have a lot of friends who are former special forces and things, and struggling still with a lot of the challenges from the things they saw and experienced. And anyways, it's tough. It's a tough thing. And I think having these habits in place and the micro and the macro, some of the best things we can do to just make sure that our mind, body, and spirit are being addressed every day. And relationships. I would say that there's 4 things we do every single day is do something to address and nourish your mind, your body, and your spirit, and your relationships. And they're simple things. And if we can do those every single day, man, the probabilities of health and happiness and well-being and success are massive. It's simple stuff that makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting. I was just thinking of some of the keynote speeches that I've given at different places, and including, into different states and whatnot. And one of the things that I think could be very beneficial for us is just compassion and love. Love is kind of the essence of just life. It's like we want to feel loved, and we want to be loved. Loving others, I think that's going to be helpful. One of the things, though, I remember I was at a place, and a buddy of mine in special operations, his buddy, this is several years ago, but he lost some limbs in an explosion. And I called him up and I said, hey, let's get together. And he said, I can't. I'm back at Walter Reed Hospital again for another surgery. And we chatted for a while, and I said, hey, I love you, man. And I could hear him crying. And he said, thanks. I really needed to hear that today. I was wondering if it was worth it anymore. Yeah. There are people all around us with emotional amputations. Maybe there's somebody listening today who has an emotional amputation. My thing is, we just need to help. We need to help ourselves. We need to help others. Let me tell you a different story. A buddy of mine, Navy SEAL, literally standing next to somebody when they got attacked. His buddy goes down. He grabs a tourniquet from off his vest and throws it to him. And then he returns fire. He goes, Jeff, if I didn't return fire, we all would have died. But unfortunately, his buddy was not able to put that tourniquet on himself in time, and he died. And part of it is, look, I need to look out for myself. I need to know how to put tourniquets on me. I need buddy aid, and I need self-aid. Self-aid is given some of the tools that we talked about today. But here's the thing. If you're thinking of ending it, don't. Hang on. Hold on. There's help. You're not thinking the right way. There are people who get you. There are people who love you. The number of completed suicides that I've investigated, and the not only death notifications that I've given, but the suicide notes that I've read, everybody who takes their life by suicide, they usually have a theme that says, I'm the problem and people will be better off without me. That's stinking thinking. That's something in their mind there that's just it's not right.
Right.
And so if it's not right, just hang on for a second, talk to somebody who gets it. Hang on.
Yeah.
And if I can look for somebody else who needs some help, getting out of myself is going to make me feel more normal.
Exactly.
Let me tell you another story. Guy has a shotgun in his mouth and ready to blow his head off. His thumb is on the trigger. He gets a knock at the door. He goes over, he goes, oh, it's a guy I'm sponsoring through AAA. I better answer it. He opens the door. The guy says, man, I am really depressed. Can you help me? Can I come in? Yeah, come on in. It normalizes it when we get out of our shell and when we help other people. Let me tell you another story.
Purpose and meaning and love. It's so powerful.
So I had a first responder, young guy, EMS. He's driving an ambulance. He gets married to his high school sweetheart. They go on a honeymoon for a couple weeks. They come back 2 weeks later. He's sponsored to a vehicle that had been hit by a drunk driver, and it was overturned. It was his wife and her best friend. He lays down on the roadway. She's still alive, but ebbing fast. He's trying to comfort her. They're trying to extract her. They try everything to extract her, and they can't, not in time. He said they tried pneumatic spreaders, the jaws of life, and everything. They couldn't extract her in time, and she died right there. He tells me, he goes, I tried to kill myself after that. And then he says, I'm not going to tell you how I know, but angels are real. I had a different background, different religion than me, different place of the country. I believe his wife came to him and stopped him. When we talked earlier, it's like, well, why didn't heaven intervene for me? Or why didn't heaven intervene in this case or that case? Okay. Well, it did in this case. And here's the thing. You and I can be angels in the flesh. We can text people. We can buddy check everybody. We can call them. A smile, a listening ear, something that just makes them feel normal. When people are grieving, we can cry with them. We can just say, you know what? I'm sorry. Sometimes you don't know what to say, but you can just be there for each other. That's what life's all about. It's that connection to say, yeah, maybe today I'll be that angel for somebody else.
Yep, 100%. This week I felt that very poignantly. I had no idea what to say, and I told him that. I said, hey, there are no words for your loss, but I just want you to know how much I love you. And that hit home for him and helped. And we did everything we could from where we are to help out. But man, I thank you, Jeff. That's what a great reminder for every one of us. Just love more, receive love, accept love, and give love. And I think, man, I'm feeling it right now. And for everybody listening, I want to give like a very specific invitation that as soon as you're done listening to this, send a text message, send an email, make a phone call, write a note, like just express some love and just sit for a minute and see whose name or face comes to your mind and just reach out and share some love. It's an incomparable power, and it's a beautiful thing. And when we lose the people we love, I know for me, the things that come up are just that grateful you express love and wish you could express it again. This stuff is good, so good and so important. For those of you listening, Jeff and I, we lost our little brother. He took his own life a few years ago. Man, I miss him. And I think about him all the time. And the last interaction I had with him was I sent him a Facebook message that just said, love you. And it shows the little icon when he's seen it. And I knew he had seen it. I took a screenshot of it. I've kept it. I'm like, the last interaction I had was an expression of love. And man, I just find myself constantly thinking, I wish I had done it even more. And so what a great reminder for all of us to just love more and let go of the annoyances and the little things we get upset about and getting all worked up about. Just keep life in perspective and share that love more.
Yeah, and it's hard when you lose a loved one, and you got to remember it's still their choice. But it's hard. And when we're expecting one thing and another thing happens, we got to remember some axioms. One, people have their choice, and I can't change what other people do. And life happens, and there are things outside of my control. But if I can look at that reality is the way it is, maybe my expectations need to go back to what God's plan is. The reality is people have their choice. The reality is it seems like life's not fair sometimes, but I think after this life we'll realize, oh, actually, it was so much more fair than we thought. And when kids or people pass, there's a plan that's greater than ours that we just don't comprehend. I am convinced of it. because there are sometimes people die that I'm like, and even talking to my medic buddies, they're like, there's no reason they should have died. Yeah, we don't know. We don't know the grand plan. We don't know what's going on in that person's body or that life, or they've fulfilled their time on earth, and there you go. Everything's going to work out. That's what I believe. And part of it is just looking to that. Let me just say, researchers Connor and Davison and Tedeschi, and I can't remember his name, that did post-traumatic growth. There are multiple researchers that have shown that spirituality is something you need. Even Edward Tick, who wrote about trauma, he said psychotherapists are trained not to talk about spirituality, but that's the very thing we need. It's like,
absolutely,
we need to have some belief, and even atheists can have a spirituality. That means, what's the purpose?
Well, we're all spiritual beings. Every one of us is a spiritual being. Absolutely. So we need to address that spiritual side of us.
Well,
awesome,
you,
brother.
Dude. Good talking to you.
Thanks for sharing this, man. How can people connect with you and your services, especially if there's people across the U.S., even globally, who work in this in medical services or in difficult situations where they're seeing stuff like this? How can they get in touch with you and your business?
JefferyDenning.com is my website, and that's about it.
Fantastic. Okay. Love it, brother. Love you, brother.
Love you,
Thanks for being on here. Thanks for sharing this message. Thanks for the good work you do, man.
Thanks for what you do.